Okay, so if that's what's going on in Europe and Ukraine and the knock-on effects of that, what about China? Well, everybody will be glad to know that the wonderful Rishi Sunak and his Japanese counterpart are meeting today at the Tower of London. Well, this is all about setting the theatre, Brian. This is all about setting the theatre. So this is what the British government had to say in their press release. Years of negotiation will culminate in the signing today, which will rapidly accelerate defence and security cooperation and allow the UK and Japan to deploy forces in one another's countries. It will also cement the UK's commitment to Indo-Pacific security, allowing both forces to plan and deliver larger scale, more complex military exercises. Now, Alex, before we sort of move on from this a little bit, I wanted to ask you about this idea of deploying forces in one another's countries, because I'm not aware that in these kind of bilateral defence and security agreements that this is a common thing. As far as I can see, I can't remember the phrase that they used to describe this, but it's now, as of today, Japan and Britain. Japan also has a similar arrangement with France and with Australia, but I'm not aware of any others anywhere. So I thought that was a very interesting statement. The Daily Mail trying to divert people's attention away, but today by claiming that any Brits serving in Japan would be subject to the death penalty if they were to commit some kind of criminal offence in Japan while they're deployed over there. But this isn't training, this is deployment.
No, crucial distinction, and I'm equally unaware of any such precedent. Of course, the Americans, largely in Okinawa, have a huge US Marine presence, and every year, I'm afraid, there are stories of rape, pillage, and murder by some of the local troops. They don't get the death penalty because of that very reason, that they're under a different treaty arrangement on a different footing. But, as usual, you should look at this through both ends. Is it that British, French, and Australian troops of all three service branches will be sent to the Japanese outer islands for air defence, as the Americans already are, or is it that Japanese, with their high-tech kit, which is under wraps, will be sent to Britain and France to protect what Britain and France no longer can protect? I think this gives more weight to Joseph Farrell's long-term suggestion that the Quad, the countries that contain China, is one of the crucial arrangements in the world. It ties Japan into being a de facto member of Five Eyes and of the Anglo-American military alliance. And at some point, the idea is to bring Russia behind that, to isolate China completely, even from its landward side. But watch this space, because the Japanese have got a lot of technology that we don't know much about.
I think we need regime change in Russia before that could happen. But anyway, let's just move on to this Financial Times article. And US military deepens ties with Japan and Philippines to prepare for China threat. This is what the article says. The US and Japanese armed forces are rapidly integrating their command structure and scaling up combined operations as Washington and its Asian allies prepare for a possible conflict with China, such as a war over Taiwan, according to top Marine Corps General in Japan. Now, of course, this needs to be seen in the context of what we were reporting a couple of days ago, with Japan now being given the go-ahead to spend lots of money against its own constitution to remilitarize. So let's bring this top Marine Corps General on screen. Here he is, Lieutenant General James Bierman, and this is what he had to say. Why have we achieved the level of success we've achieved in Ukraine? Well, this may undermine everything else that he has to say here, but nonetheless, it goes on. A big part of that has been because after Russian aggression in 2014 and 2015, we earnestly got after preparing for future conflict, training for the Ukrainians, pre-positioning of supplies, identification of sites from which we could operate, support, sustain operations. We call that setting the theatre, and we're setting the theatre in Japan, in the Philippines, and other locations. That's quite an admission. This is basically saying we are preparing for war.
Well, we are preparing for war. We've been preparing for that war for some years, but it's just we haven't bothered to tell the American or the British public what's going on. And I'll just add in here that UK column viewers are commenting that as we're reporting on these unfolding but largely unknown events, none of it was debated in the national parliaments. So we're now seeing effectively the military acting as though it was able to make decisions for itself.
So it's interesting you say that, because Rishi will sign this agreement with Japan, this defence agreement with Japan. That will go to Parliament in the next couple of weeks. And so there is an opportunity for MPs to perhaps reject it. And so maybe that's an opportunity for people to start contacting their MPs and having a discussion about it. But in the meantime, obviously China is starting to get more annoyed with what's going on here. And so this is Voice of America saying China snubs US military outreach ahead of expected Blinken visit. According to US diplomatic sources who spoke on background when discussing the sensitive issue, the proposed call on Friday between Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chinese Defense Minister was cancelled after Beijing declined to participate. After the Pentagon was asked about Austin's contacts with the Chinese counterpart, the Pentagon said, well, basically he hasn't spoken to them since November. So we sort of see the same type of situation, Alex, very briefly, the same type of situation developing here on a diplomatic level with China as we saw with Russia, particularly, the West annoying the Russians to such a degree that they were sort of stepping back from proper discussions, and then the blame falling on Russia for that. And the same thing, I'm quite sure we're going to start seeing headlines in the media in the not too distant future that China refuses to negotiate or discuss.
Yes, these things have a multi-year trajectory to them, and so we could say it's roughly 2018 now in Russian terms in the US-China relationship. A couple of things will have to happen before there's a real proxy war, such as over Taiwan. One, if it follows the Russian trajectory anyway, which it probably will, one will be that the Chinese will say, as the Russians did, that the Western leadership is incapable of reaching agreement and has lost its mind. And the next, which they're close to in their press announcements, but not at diplomatic level yet. And the second will be an ultimatum, such as Russia issued in autumn 2021, on the basis of which, when it's refused by the West, China will perhaps take military action.
Yeah, okay. So let's move on to Brazil, Alex.
Just to show a few seconds of this silently, because there's a lot of turmoil and uncertainty over what's happening in Brazil. Our best viewers in Brazil and from Brazil are assuring us that they really don't know much what's happening themselves. This also seems not to be playing, but it's just to show people that there is footage of some relatively junior troops in Brazil actually defecting to the Bolsonaro side. Of course, Bolsonaro, Jair Bolsonaro, is in Florida now and reportedly has had severe stomach pains while he's been in Florida, possibly suspiciously, possibly not. Lula has now been sworn in and taken on his office as the Brazilian president. We're deliberately not covering a great deal because it's a fast-moving situation with, as usual, with regime change situations, a lot of fake news and unreliable sources out there, not all of which is malicious. Some of it is just that this seems to be well-intentioned or to make money. However, I will show this, which will play silently in the background, I hope, which is, no, again, that's failing, but this is just a clip of a Brazilian ex-serviceman who, for a minute and a half, rips up most of the photographs that you can see in the display cabinet behind him of his time in the service. He says he feels ashamed now to have been a Brazilian serviceman because of the way that they've obeyed unconstitutional orders from the Supreme Judge there, Alexandre de Moraes. And he saves one photograph, which is of his old mate from his service time, but all the rest and his medals go in the bin and the photographs get ripped up. Pretty sad to see, but you can see what's going on there. The Brazilian military's being brand destroyed. Some people inside the movement of those who went in to seize Congress and the presidential palace a few days ago reported that non-Brazilian troops, Spanish-speaking troops from perhaps Venezuela or Chile or Bolivia were being deployed, the same countries who are now circling around Lula and deploring the actions of the Bolsonarites in Brasilia. That's a possibility. I just wanted to take people back 5 years to when I had a Facebook channel. I put this up once exactly 5 years ago now, when we were getting to the stage of European Union military unification being hard to ignore. And this perhaps explains a lot of things to do with the destruction of national militaries. In 2014, the City and Wall Street told then Prime Minister David Cameron, our investors are fed up waiting for the British to accept EU military union. You have to force their hand. Hence the referendum which Cameron thought he could win. And Juncker said, fine, but give us a bit of time to awake the sleeping beauty of the Lisbon Treaty, the provision made in 2009 for military unification under PESCO, the acronym that was used. Cameron went ahead, but of course the British voted the wrong way. And then in 2018, the time when I was writing this, bogeyman Putin was providing the pretext for Europe to stand with Britain to the city's orders. And I think since then we have seen that go the same way. And just in passing, intelnews.org is picking up on a December announcement by the German Foreign Intelligence Agency, the Bundesnachrichtendienst or BND, that one of its seniors in signals intelligence, my old profession, may have been turned by the Russians. It's possible that this has been done through blackmail, compromat. He's being painted as an AfD right-wing extremist. Who knows? But as I expected before I got to this point in the article, just by scrolling through it, the British are livid because these kinds of officers are treated as de facto NSA or GCHQ officers for an increasing number of purposes. So the Russians may have got quite a head start on British and American signals intelligence through this turning.
Does, and you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. That'd be very much appreciated and needed. Or you can pick something up at the UK Column shop. But please do share material on the various platforms. Now, quick advertisement here for a children's event in Scotland.
David Scott is one of the speakers. There's a meeting in front of the Scottish Parliament, Holyrood, at the lower end of the Royal Mile, at noon on Thursday the 12th, that's tomorrow, and it's Protect Children from the Scottish Government's Transgender Obsession and the Sexualisation Agenda. The title of the gathering is We Stand Together for the Women and Children. So if you're anywhere near Edinburgh, do go and cheer David on.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, another one of
Well,
David's...
this was another rally which David was keen that we alerted our viewers and listeners to. So this is anniversary of the biggest freedom rally Scotland has ever seen. Saturday, the 21st of January, 1 p.m, Glasgow Green at the Commonwealth Monument. And obviously, if you're able to travel north of the border or you're in Scotland, perhaps you would consider turning up and giving your support.
And then just finally on this little bit, I'm going to put a health warning out here, so I do apologise for this in advance, but this is just such an egregious piece of propaganda because Rishi Sunak is going to make his first address to the nation tonight on BBC and ITV, and he put together a little propaganda piece to advertise it. Let's have a look.
I guarantee that your priorities will be my priorities. I will only promise what I can deliver, and I will deliver what I promise.
Well, I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, I've chuckled, so that says it all. Do we really have a Prime Minister anymore? I don't think so. He's something different. He is now a representative of these globalist powers. So just as we've often said, the MPs are just representatives of their party. We've now got a Prime Minister who's representative of the globalist order. More on that.